Welcome to episode 13 of the Business of E-commerce podcast. And we are back again with Dave Petti of Kayo 3PL. This is part two of the tariffs episode. Last week, we talked a lot about tariffs, and today we're going to continue the discussion on tariffs because a lot of things have again changed last week. Today, we'll focus on the de minimis exemption. So as of Friday, um, all the shipments coming in from China or like goods of Chinese origin are no longer and can no longer be exempted under the $800 rule. So, David, let's just briefly talk about. I think most of my audience know exactly what de minimis is, but let's just take a minute to explain what that is and what has changed since Friday.
Sure. Yeah, it was a rule brought in 1930-ish in U.S. trade. Basically means not worth the effort to collect. And it started out at about $1 per person, was raised to about 50, 200, and in around 2012, 2014, it was raised to $800 U.S. per person per day. There was a lot of argument whether the postal system packages apply to it. It was kind of just accepted as that. So up until Friday, you were allowed to ship any items under $800 US in value into the USA, tax and duty free, with no real compliance paperwork, with no vendor information, nothing.
Yeah.
That turned into 4 million parcels per day coming
Yeah.
into America.
And
About
I
one,
think the yeah, and
oh,
I think the biggest uses of that was like Temu and Shein, right? So if you
yeah,
buy something on Temu, it's shipping directly into your home address, and if it's below $800, they don't pay any import duty, right?
exactly. I think it was a million parcels a day of the 4 million were just Temu and Shine.
Yeah.
Sheen, I think it's called.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's a weird situation because the 2018 China tariffs were not part of the de minimis rules. That's another big thing.
Yeah.
So for many companies, many brands, many drop shippers, you weren't paying any tariffs on Chinese goods into America. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so it was a way from the American point of view to inspire economic growth and prosperity in other countries as well.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
So this obviously, I think there's a lot of stuff that's happening on tariffs, but I think this is one area where it seems like there's bipartisan support in closing this de minimis loophole, right? Because I remember even before Trump was elected, even during the Biden administration, I think there were bills in the Congress trying to ban this because fundamentally, if you look at it, someone who imported in bulk from China, stored it in a warehouse here, and shipped it locally is paying import duty, but a company like Timor, Shein, or like anyone else who's importing directly from China is not paying a duty. That seems like exactly the opposite of what it should look like, right? So everyone was trying to close it. So just like in this one area, there is unanimous agreement that closing de minimis is a good thing for U.S. businesses.
Yeah, in the last couple of years, there's been a number of Congress people who have been pushing for de minimis reform.
Hmm.
Not many people know, but this actually started September 13th, 2024, with Joe
Hmm.
Biden. He actually put an executive order in changing some of the data points for de minimis, which was fine, but also removing Chinese goods from the de minimis rules.
Hmm.
Coincidentally, after the rule making process and review, it was going to be April of 2025 when Chinese goods were removed from de minimis.
Okay.
Mr. Trump just expedited it in February for a few days and
Hmm.
then decided May 2nd to remove it entirely.
Okay.
So, hot topic. It's a rare thing in US politics where both sides of the aisle agree on the same thing.
Okay. So let's dig into this a little bit. So obviously, this rule, the new rule starting this weekend is that if the product is made in China, then you can no longer claim that exemption under $800. But if the product is made in, let's say, Vietnam, then it's still applicable. So only for products made in China, right? That's where the law changed.
Correct. The last message from the White House is the rest of the world will follow suit within, I think, by the end of this year.
Okay.
Now, if there's a trade deal made between the U.S. and Vietnam, it might include de minimis entry for Vietnam goods. We'll see. We don't know.
Okay.
Um,
So let's talk about the obvious thing that a lot of people on LinkedIn and Twitter are talking about. Are there loopholes or ways around it, or what is considered as fraud? So, for example, can I just ship all my goods from China into Vietnam, store it there for a day, and then ship it directly into the US and claim that it's not? So, what is acceptable and what is outright fraud?
Yeah, there's a term for it. I think it's transshipment. No, you cannot do that.
Yeah.
It's where the product was made is where your tariffs reside. There
Mhm.
are rules on what's called substantial transformation, and I believe 51% of the product has to be substantially transformed. But
Mhm.
please understand, it, if you get audited, it's up to the discretion of the CBP agent to make that determination. There was a quick situation in Mexico where they were taking components and putting it into a final assembly. It actually met the 51% rule, but the CBP agent investigating that still decided it was made in China. So
Okay.
it is not something you want to build your business on. Now, by saying that, you can still like get the fabric. Let's say you're in apparel, you can get the fabric made in China, sent to Vietnam, cut, sewed, packaged, labeled, and that could qualify you for made in Vietnam.
Okay.
If you really want more information, you're going to have to consult a licensed customs broker in the US to get very, very specific consulting on that.
Okay. So there is some subjectivity to how that 51% is met, right? So it's kind of designed for legitimate cases where you're actually truly manufacturing it in a third party country. Maybe you're procuring raw material from China, but you're
Yeah.
actually making stuff. But if you just try to cheat the system, it's not. You're clearly, that is fraud. You're breaking the law. And then, so I think another common question that comes up is, so if I'm a small business and I'm buying from a supplier abroad, who's liable to this? If there is like, if it turns out that, okay, the label says made in Vietnam, but CBP determines that no, this is really made in China, am I, the business owner in the US, liable to this, or is it the supplier?
You're the importer of record, yes. Even
Okay.
if we send it DDP, where they're the importer of record, it doesn't matter. CBP will try to hold them account. They won't probably answer the call, and
Oh, yeah.
ultimately you will be account for it. So you have to make sure your suppliers are in compliance.
Okay. So this basically, it increases the level of risk that you as a US business is taking, because if CBP cannot find that, they obviously, and they cannot apply all their tools on an international entity, right? So they can only come after you. Now let's talk briefly about Temu and Shein itself. So it looks like, I know a lot, their business model is fundamentally changed overnight, right? Starting Friday night, right? So what's the latest? I know that this weekend people were saying that they are displaying tariffs, but I think now the latest is that they have completely stopped the direct shipment model from China, right? They're managing warehouses in the US and shipping out of there.
I think I said in the last podcast, and I'll say it again. DDU pricing, or in other words, putting up the tariffs on a line item, is the end of your business and brand in America. Do
Mhm.
not do that. And Timu tried to do it, and the backlash has been epic.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
they basically decided that they're going to, I believe, just bury it into the piece price, which is, in my opinion, the best way for your brand.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so now they're no longer doing de minimis shipping. Well, they can't.
Mhm.
Uh, and then I believe they're going to bulk import into the U.S. and use their own distribution or a 3PL.
Okay. So then it becomes directly, almost exactly like the typical, the Amazon model, right? You're importing everything in bulk, you store it in your DCs here, and then you ship it out. I also know that Temu is like aggressively going after US-based small businesses to list on their marketplace. So exactly like the Amazon third-party model, so
That's
that they have a marketplace with like a lot of eyeballs. So they want to also get like third parties to list there. So that's going to be I think, an interesting transformation. Effectively, the tax advantage of Temu and Shein have disappeared, but they still have all the logistics advantages, and then
yeah.
now they will kind of transform their business into utilizing all the lead that they have built up, right?
The de minimis rules were done in good faith, but I think it's allowed a couple things to happen. Number one, it allowed foreign brands who do not contribute to American society to compete against American businesses.
Mhm.
And number two, and I've been a de minimis shipper for 15 years out of Canada. I can tell you right now, packages were not being inspected, and nobody really knows the volume of illegal stuff that has been flowing in.
Yeah.
My suspicion, it's massive,
Mm.
but it's been a real problem for many years, and it's kind of a good thing it's been closed.
Okay. So, and I have not looked at the latest data on this, but I think the expectation out of those millions of packages coming in on a daily basis, I assume majority was China, right? So it means that de minimis shipments from rest of the world is what is it, like less than 10% of the daily volume?
Last statistics I saw, about 67% of all daily de minimis shipments were Chinese made. So that only leaves about 33% left. So
Oh,
33 of 4 million, I don't know what that number is, but
yeah. Okay. So it's about like a million-ish. So basically, two-third of the volume has disappeared. How does this impact CBP? I assume this means, I mean, I don't know if they were like inspecting on a daily basis. If they were, this frees up capacity to do other work, right?
can tell you right now, my truck, my driver's been crossing for 15 years, and we do
Yeah.
our stuff legitimately.
Yeah.
They barely check. And
Okay.
containers full of packages were coming in from China.
Oh,
I can assure you nobody was checking that as well. So
okay.
CBP has made it very clear publicly that they're no longer in the business of inspecting packages. They only want to inspect bulk items into the United States. They can
Okay.
control it better, and they can do compliance much better that way.
Okay. So, so therefore, I guess like they were not inspecting it. So in a way, this is good for CBP because the volume is reduced and they can like focus their resources on inspecting the bulk shipments instead of going after going after the individual packages model.
Believe it or not, when I would cross the border with de minimis packages, I kind of found that the border agents were not happy about this program because I
Mm.
think what happened was is they put it in but didn't give them the resources to actually enforce it.
Okay. 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 That makes sense. So how does this impact? I think another side effect of de minimis being around was warehouses around the border, right? Like Mexico and Canada border, where people were shipping it in bulk into those warehouses, and then from there they were shipping it as individual packages out, right? Do
Hmm.
you foresee, and I think you kind of do that in a very legitimate way, following all the rules. So how do you see this impacting that business model, and how does this impact what you're doing in the long run?
It basically puts Canadian and U.S. 3PLs out of business in terms of shipping to America.
Okay.
uh, because you only can do it by DDU or DDP. DDU is where you make your customers pay in the US, and I would not advise that. In
Okay.
DDP, you're paying brokerage and fees from those countries in. So it also creates now a double tariff situation because you have
Mhm.
to pay tariff into your country, like let's just say Canada, and
Mhm.
then tariff to the US. So you doubled your tariff on those goods. So,
Ah, okay, so that model is gone unless they're doing like what you're doing, which is the
yeah,
foreign trade zone model where like you don't
exactly.
pay it twice. Okay.
Yeah.
So effectively all this border 3PLs, if they don't have this like FTZ model, then they're kind of out of business because they'll end up paying double. It's much better to just ship it directly into a 3PL inside the US and then ship it domestically to all
Yeah.
to the customer.
The one thing I want to say to people who are watching this is you might not even know you were shipping your parcels de minimis. Let
Mhm.
me explain that. When you shipped parcels with UPS, FedEx, DHL eCommerce in the past, they were all actually using the de minimis rules. You just
Mm.
didn't know it, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Um, so um, that's one big point. And I think a lot of people, even up until Tuesday, 3 days after, 4 days after the change, don't really understand that. So I wanted to get that message out.
So in that example, you're saying if you're shipping, let's say you're shipping anything, even like a personal item, right? Let's say I have a friend who lives in China and they're shipping me a gift, right? When they're shipping that, previously, as long as the value of that gift is below $800, they don't need to pay any taxes. But now they're shipping it from China, they have to pay taxes, right? On that.
Duties, taxes, brokerage, disbursement fees.
Okay. And
Yeah.
DHL will charge you for all of that for those individual shipments. Cool.
Yeah.
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 But if it's from another country, let's say from if they're shipping the same thing from Vietnam or India, then that $800 threshold is still valid, so they don't
If,
need to pay,
if,
assuming the product is not made in China, right? So
exactly.
okay.
Exactly.
So on the personal shipment side, that's how it works. What's the latest ever since this rule has come into place? How are you seeing anything different happening at the border when you cross the border with your truck? Or I think I remember reading about another provider who I think they were getting like turned back. Like chit chat or something. So
Yeah, ultimately now you have to comply with formal clearance, it's called, and essentially your product has to be labeled properly. You need to have your vendor and manufacturing information because CBP is really focused on forced labor camps.
mm,
And in some cases, you have to have your safety and compliance and material lists for some of the products. Like I ship these little paint kits,
mm-hmm,
and de minimis, I could just ship them over. Nobody would ask a question.
mm,
Now I have to provide a certificate describing what material is in the little paint cups.
mm.
Okay, so again, I know this is very disruptive for so many people, but in fairness, now U.S. is making sure the goods coming in are safe,
Mm.
right? So
Yeah.
um, it's been dramatic. There has been trucks already turned around, mostly by third-party cross-border solutions like Chit Chats, because people are putting "Made in Vietnam" on the declaration, but there's a Chinese product in the package. So
Mm. Okay.
they're being inspected, and those trucks are being turned around. And it is about a $50,000 U.S. fine for every violation you make. So
Okay. So
um,
these importers, like cross-border importers, so they need to, so they can no longer just blindly accept a package and cross it across the border, right? Because they're ultimately liable for it. Whereas
y-
in your case, it's different because you, I think we talked about in the last episode, you are the owner of that inventory. So every package that's coming in, you're opening and inspecting, and then you have to like literally own it because you're liable to getting it across the border.
my packers will check to make sure this says made in China or whatever
Mm.
on the product.
Okay.
I'm only doing it this way because I need to see and field and hold the product. I need to make sure they're not fakes or counterfeits or anything like that.
Hmm.
So unfortunately for those cross-border companies, to me, the business model will not work by picking up
Mm.
parcels that you can't see inside of them,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Okay, cool. And then that advantage of, like you were saying earlier, the advantage of having importing it to a warehouse on the other side of the border and then shipping it, that's completely disappeared. So now me as a brand, there is no reason for me to use that, right? I might as well like import it directly into the US, store it and ship it, or
Um,
do, or in your case, there's a benefit because of the, I can
yeah.
delay the tariffs.
So in the last couple of days, I've had companies who have US 3PLs, and they're literally saying to me, I cannot afford to bring in my container of goods into the USA. I
Mhm.
cannot afford it. It's on the
Yeah.
boat, it's on the ocean. I don't have the money they want. So
Right.
using places like us outside of America is very beneficial in those cases.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. So that I think that's a very important point too. And then for the listeners, you can go check out the previous episode. Uh, these tariffs are due at the time of receiving the container. So if you're ordered like $1 million worth of goods from China, and that's your business model, you're bringing those containers in, then you're shipping it out over the next couple of months from the warehouse in the US. That for that $1 million worth of goods, you're paying at 150% tariff. $1.5 million in tariffs are owed when you receive it, and you haven't actually even like sold those products or shipped them out. So this creates a huge cash flow issue, and that's why this model of like using either bonded warehouses where you can defer those taxes to a later point, or using like the foreign trade zone in Canada, like what David's company does, where you don't need to, you can defer paying those taxes, which kind of helps solve the cash flow issue. So I think maybe that's there's going to be innovation around that, right? How do you defer taxes purely from a cash flow point of view? Yes, you still owe them, but
yeah,
I don't have the money to just pay those taxes until I sell
exactly.
the product. Yeah.
Exactly. I want to just say one more thing to all your viewers. It's a
Mhm.
very positive message.
Yeah.
These changes are good. These changes stop the drop shippers. These changes stop the copycatters. These changes stop all of that. They stop undercutting you. They
Hmm.
stop, underpricing you. This is a very good thing. It's painful, and I know it hurts, and I know it's scary to raise your prices, but you have to raise your prices, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. The vast majority of your competitors in your respective industry are going to exit. So
Hmm.
at the end of this, you're going to have a much bigger market share. Be positive, make the changes, communicate to your customers why you have to raise your prices, and
Hmm.
wait this out. It's going to stop a lot of the nonsense
Mhm.
That's been happening for a very long time.
Yeah, and again, when it comes to de minimis, I think I 100% agree. I think the side effect of it was a lot of brands based in the US who were trying to sell a similar product, they were not price competitive because if you're not doing direct ship from China, so someone who's direct shipping from China was able to sell exactly the same product way below the price because they had no tariffs, right? Whereas you doing business in the model where like you're bringing it to the US and shipping it out, you had to pay the tariff. So this kind of that unfair advantage for this direction from China is gone. So this is better for a US based brand, particularly on the de minimis side. And I guess that's why, like you said, it's very rare to see like uh, unanimity from both sides of the political spectrum. I think both parties agree that this is a good thing. So that's exciting. I think another funny side effect of this that we were talking earlier was there is another fraud. Since I'm in the space where like we print out like USPS labels for our customers by connecting the USPS API, there were these third parties that were like printing these USPS labels sitting in China, right? And I think the model was that they would print these USPS labels, put it on the package, and then bring it into the US in bulk and then drop it into the USPS mail stream. But it turns out that it's even worse than that. Those USPS labels were not even legitimate. It somehow reaches the consumer, but those labels were not being paid for. And I do remember me and I think there were a few other shipping software CEOs who were talking about it. We have been approached by these like shady third parties who are saying that, okay, hey, we can get you like these super discounted USPS labels. I'm like, this doesn't sound right. And then someone else I saw on LinkedIn that I think it was Aaron from Ship Hero. He had investigated it and he wrote an article about it saying this is like outright fraud. So
Yeah.
looks
Yeah.
like that model is like USPS has shut down that, right? There's a new rule
Yeah.
around it.
It's actually CBP. So CBP
Okay.
on Thursday told us that they're no longer allowing labels, USPS labels generated outside of America to
Hmm.
enter America. And that's another seismic change.
Right.
A lot of these Chinese companies were printing the fake USPS labels,
Right.
throwing them into a container, and injecting them into the mail streams once it entered America. That's all
Okay.
gone too. So we do have
Okay.
an innovative solution around that we could help anybody who needs to see the problem though. I mean, here's the problem. We have like a lot of Canadian sellers who sell on US platforms
Mhm.
can only use their labels. That's all they allow.
Hmm.
Well, now people are in big trouble. So if anybody's in that position, we can help you out. You can reach out to me and I can talk to you about it.
Cool. Yeah, I need to take a deeper look at this, how what this means if you are like sitting, if you're outside of the US, but you still want to ship within the US. So I think
They need to be
that
what's called
process.
a GDE compliant label,
Okay.
which basically means it's not the 2D version of it. And I believe the fraud was around the 2D barcode. And I'm not sure the details, but my
Okay.
suspicion is they were forging the 2D barcodes.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. So I think we covered a lot today. It was super informative, and the tariff situation is like constantly evolving. So we just keep an eye on what the latest is. And before we go, just a plug for Ordoro. We are a shipping and inventory management software for a lot of smaller brands who are selling through Shopify, Amazon, etc. So if you are one of those, if you fit that profile, take a look at us. And David runs 3PL in Canada called Kayo 3PL. So if you're interested in imports and tariffs and how you can uh, how you can like transform or change some of your importing operations, go take a look at. David has written a lot about it, and he talks about it often on LinkedIn. So go take a look at it. So
Absolutely.
yeah, till next time. Thank you for watching the show again, and David, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye bye.